The emotional confrontation. The house was eerily quiet, except for the soft ticking of the clock in the living room. The faint glow from the table lamp illuminated the space, casting long shadows across the walls. It was nearly midnight, but Lily wasn't sleeping. She sat on the edge of the couch, her bare feet cold against the hardwood floor, her fingers trembling slightly as she scrolled through the text messages on David's phone. Her heart pounded in her chest. The conversation between her husband and Jessica was explicit, casual flirtations leading to photos, intimate confessions, and promises to see each other again. It wasn't just a fling. The way they talked, it was clear this had been going on for months. Every word, every emoji felt like a knife twisting deeper into her heart. But Lily's face remained composed, her lips pressed into a thin line. The storm raged inside, but she would not let it show. Not yet. The sound of keys jingling at the front door broke the stillness. The lock clicked, and the door opened slowly. David walked in, tired but oblivious, shrugging off his jacket as he stepped into the hallway. He didn't notice her at first. He tossed his keys on the entry table and sighed, loosening his tie as he made his way toward the living room. When he finally looked up and saw Lily sitting there, still quiet, with his phone glowing in her hand, his blood ran cold. He stopped in his tracks, the weariness from his long day instantly replaced with dread. "Lily," he began, his voice uncertain, though he hadn't fully processed what she might have seen. She didn't look at him immediately. Her eyes were still fixed on the phone, scrolling slowly, methodically, through the messages. She took her time, reading each one as if savoring every painful revelation. Then, without looking up, she spoke, her voice calm, eerily controlled. "Is there anything you want to say to me?" David's heart dropped. He knew. He knew she had seen something, everything, and the weight of his deceit crashed down on him. His mind raced, searching for excuses, explanations, anything that could minimize the damage. He swallowed hard, trying to regain his composure. "Lily, his voice faltered, and he stopped, taking a deep breath. There was no point denying it. "It's not what you think. I mean, it is, but it wasn't serious. It was a mistake. A stupid mistake." Lily finally looked up, her dark eyes locking onto his. There was no anger in them, no tears, just an unsettling calm that made him even more nervous. She didn't respond. Instead, she held up the phone, her finger hovering over the screen. "This," she said, scrolling through an especially intimate message from Jessica, "this doesn't look like a mistake." David's stomach turned. I know what it looks like, but it wasn't supposed to be anything. It just happened." He stepped closer, his voice rising with desperation. "I was stressed from work. I wasn't thinking. I didn't mean for it to get this far." Lily remained silent, her expression unreadable as she watched him flounder. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze never leaving his face. "How long?" David's eyes darted away. "A few months. But Lily, it doesn't mean anything. I swear to God, it's over. It's done." "A few months," she repeated, her voice hollow. "So, for a few months, you've been coming home to me, lying to my face. And you think saying it doesn't mean anything will make this better?" David's mouth opened, but no words came out. He could feel the panic rising in his chest. I love you, Lily. I don't love her. It was just, I don't know, a distraction, a mistake. But I'm here now, and I'll fix it. I'll cut all ties with Jessica. I swear. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." He moved toward her, reaching out to take her hand, but she pulled back, her eyes hardening for just a moment before softening again. She sighed deeply, almost as if weary of the entire situation. The silence hung heavy between them as she processed his words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lily stood up, smoothing out the creases in her pants. She walked to the mantel, placing his phone down carefully, then turned back to face him. Her expression was unreadable, her voice unervingly steady. "I forgive you." David blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "What?" "I forgive you," Lily repeated, locking eyes with him. "Let's move on." David stared at her, his heart still pounding. You You forgive me? Yes, she said, her voice even. We'll put this behind us. We'll move forward. We can rebuild. For a moment, David stood there, utterly confused. This wasn't the explosive confrontation he had feared. This wasn't the tearful screaming match or the dramatic ultimatum. She wasn't packing her bags or throwing his clothes out the window. She was calm. She was forgiving him. Relief flooded through him, almost too good to be true. He swallowed hard, nodding. Thank you, he whispered, his voice shaking slightly. I promise I'll make it up to you. I'll be the husband you deserve. I won't let this happen again. Lily nodded softly, her face unreadable. She stepped closer and placed a hand on his arm. I'm sure you'll try, David, she said gently. We'll move on from this. Just like you said. David, visibly relieved, let out a long breath. Thank you, he repeated, wrapping his arms around her. He held her tight, pressing his face into her hair, grateful that he hadn't lost her. But as he held her, his eyes closed, missing the faint, cold smile that crossed Lily's face. She rested her head against his chest, the storm within her settling into something darker, more determined. Yes, David, she whispered, barely loud enough for him to hear. We'll move on. But as she stood there in his embrace, the audience would see it. The look in her eyes that spoke of something far more sinister than forgiveness. A quiet rage that simmered beneath the surface. She had already made up her mind, and David, foolish, unobservant David, had no idea that she had just begun planning his downfall. Act 1. The illusion of rebuilding. The months that followed Lily's declaration of forgiveness seemed to usher in a period of healing, at least on the surface. David, desperate to make things right, immersed himself in their recovery. Therapy sessions became weekly rituals, with David eagerly participating, overcompensating with emotional openness and vulnerability. He filled his calendar with romantic weekend getaways, wine-tasting tours, and lavish dinners at her favorite restaurants. In the mornings, he'd cook her breakfast, experimenting with omelets, pancakes, or croissants, hoping the gesture would prove his commitment. He'd even picked up her favorite flowers on his way home from work, placing them in vases around the house as symbols of his renewed devotion. Lily smiled through it all. She thanked him, held his hand during therapy, and always responded with words of reassurance. We're moving forward, she'd say softly, her voice like a balm to David's guilt. To an outside observer, they were the perfect example of a couple rebuilding after betrayal, determined, supportive, patient. But beneath that serene mask, Lily's mind was always working, planning her long game with meticulous precision. The sabotage begins at work. It started small, subtle enough to be easily dismissed as coincidences or bad luck. At work, David had an important presentation to give to the board of directors, a make-or-break moment for securing his next promotion. The night before, he had spent hours perfecting his slides, rehearsing his lines, and organizing his notes. Confident, he went to bed early, knowing that he had prepared everything. Or so he thought. The next morning, as he stood in front of the boardroom, ready to project his slides, the screen went blank. His PowerPoint files were missing, and despite his frantic attempts to recover them from his laptop, nothing worked. The presentation was a disaster, leaving David flustered and embarrassed in front of his superiors. His boss gave him a disappointed glance, and David felt a knot tighten in his stomach. When he got home that evening, he mentioned the catastrophe to Lily as they sat at the dinner table. She was stirring a pot of soup, calm as ever. I don't know how it happened. I swear, I had everything ready, David muttered, running a hand through his hair. Maybe you were just stressed, love, Lily said, her voice soothing. You've been working so hard lately. Don't be too hard on yourself. She ladled a bowl of soup for him, placing it in front of him with a gentle smile. David took a sip, but the soup was overly salty, almost undrinkable. He winced. Lily raised an eyebrow. Too salty, she asked, her tone full of innocent concern. It's fine, David lied, setting the spoon down. Just a little too much for my taste. Lily's smile didn't falter. She picked up her bowl, sipping slowly, enjoying the flavors. It's an easy fix for next time. David shrugged it off. too preoccupied with his work mishap to dwell on the food. A series of coincidences. Over the next few weeks, things began to unravel further. He had several other meetings lined up, but somehow, his materials kept getting misplaced. One morning, he realized that a crucial email he had drafted days ago, one that was supposed to secure a partnership with a major client, had never been sent. He distinctly remembered pressing send. He had checked and double-checked. He confronted his assistant, asking if they had seen anything odd, but no one had touched his computer. The missed opportunity set him back months. David's frustration began seeping into other areas of his life. He snapped at his colleagues, accusing them of not doing their jobs correctly. He even lashed out at his assistant, convinced that someone was sabotaging his work. He grew paranoid, double-checking everything, creating backups for his backups. Despite his efforts, things continued to slip through the cracks. At home, Lily noticed the change. She watched with quiet satisfaction as David's once confident demeanor turned into anxious paranoia. The games at home. Lily's sabotage extended beyond his professional life. She knew David's weaknesses, his need for control and perfection. So, she began tampering with the little things that would drive him mad without ever arousing suspicion. His favorite shirts mysteriously went missing from the laundry, only to reappear days later wrinkled beyond repair. His morning coffee, once strong and energizing, now tasted weak and watery. He complained about it one day. "I don't understand, Lily. The coffee's been terrible lately. Did we switch brands?" She glanced at him from across the kitchen, sipping her perfectly brewed cup. "No, it's the same. Maybe your taste is changing?" She smirked behind her cup. "I could try a stronger brew tomorrow." David nodded, unsure. "Yeah, maybe." It seemed like every morning he faced a new minor irritation. His tie wasn't where he left it, the hot water would run cold in the shower, and the Wi-Fi mysteriously cut out whenever he tried to work from home. Then, the real blow came. His car, practically his prized possession, developed a persistent issue. The engine sputtered unpredictably, and despite multiple trips to the mechanic, they couldn't figure out what was wrong. Lily was the one who suggested it might be time for a new car, feigning concern for his safety. David couldn't afford that now, not with his work performance faltering and his boss breathing down his neck. Fractures began to show. David's patience was running thin. At work, his colleagues avoided him. He had snapped at his closest friend, Jeff, during a minor disagreement about a project timeline, and word had gotten around. The whispers in the office grew louder as David's paranoia worsened. At home, the tension between him and Lily was palpable, though it was mostly one-sided. David was more withdrawn, visibly frustrated. Yet Lily remained the picture of calm and composure. She played the role of the supportive wife perfectly. She comforted him when he came home ranting about his latest workplace misfortune. She massaged his shoulders and whispered reassuring words in his ear. "I know things are tough right now," she'd say softly, stroking his hair, "but we'll get through this. I'm here for you." David would close his eyes and nod, sinking into her touch, but a small voice in the back of his mind wondered why everything was falling apart, no matter how hard he tried. The shift in the dynamic. Lily began to enjoy her game more with each passing day. She took note of how easily David fell apart with just the smallest nudges. While he panicked about missing work emails and malfunctioning gadgets, she effortlessly maintained the facade of the calm, supportive spouse. He was too consumed by his spiraling life to even notice the role she played in his undoing. One evening, while they were sitting on the couch watching TV, David glanced at Lily, his eyes tired and full of suspicion. "Do you ever think we're cursed?" he asked, half joking. But there was a thread of desperation in his voice. Lily chuckled softly, not taking her eyes off the screen. "Cursed? No, love. I think you've just had a rough patch. But things will get better." She turned to him, offering a sympathetic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You've got me, remember?" David smiled weakly, leaning his head against her shoulder, though his mind was still racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was out to get him. But Lily, his sweet, loving wife, was always there, wasn't she? She couldn't be part of it, could she? The audience, of course, would know better. Act 2. The slow descent. The unraveling of David's life began gradually, like a crack in the foundation that deepened over time. In the beginning, he tried to ignore it, chalked it up to bad luck, to a rough patch everyone goes through. But the streak of misfortune never ended. It only grew. And in the midst of it all, Lily remained his anchor, the calm in the storm. He clung to her, never suspecting that she was the very architect of his downfall. David's professional life, once promising, now teetered on the brink of collapse. Colleagues who had once admired his drive and charisma now avoided him. At first, it was subtle. Missed lunches, fewer invitations to meetings, cold stares in the hallway. He convinced himself they were just busy. But as weeks passed, the avoidance became unmistakable. Conversations died when he entered a room, and he began to hear murmurs of unreliable and paranoid behind his back. He confided in Jeff, his closest friend at the office, during one of their rare coffee breaks. "I don't get it, man," David muttered, stirring his coffee absently. "It's like everything is slipping out of my hands. Projects fall apart, deals go missing, and now I'm even hearing rumors that I'm unstable." He shook his head in disbelief. "Do you think people are talking about me?" Jeff gave him a hesitant look, as though debating how honest to be. "Look, David, you've been tense lately. Everyone's noticed. You're not yourself. Maybe you just need to take a step back." David's brow furrowed. "Step back? I can't afford to step back right now." "I know," Jeff sighed, glancing away, "but I think you're pushing people away without realizing it." David felt a pang of frustration, but bit his tongue. The conversation ended awkwardly, and as Jeff walked away, David stared down into his cup, the bitterness of the coffee matching his mood. The sabotage intensifies. At home, Lily continued her sabotage, ramping it up with subtlety and precision. She knew David's routines and vulnerabilities intimately, using that knowledge to destabilize him. She started with small things, setting his phone's alarm for the wrong time, causing him to oversleep and miss critical morning meetings. Then, she tampered with his medication. David had been prescribed a mild anti-anxiety pill after his growing stress started taking a toll. But after a few days of taking them, his symptoms didn't improve, they worsened. His heart raced unpredictably, and waves of dizziness left him nauseated. At work, he could barely focus, struggling to keep his balance during meetings. One night, David collapsed into the bed, exhausted, his head pounding. "Something's wrong," he mumbled to Lily, who sat beside him, reading a book. "The meds. I feel worse. Dizzy. Anxious all the time." Lily looked at him, her face a mask of concern. "Maybe you should see the doctor again. It might be a side effect." David nodded weakly, his head resting on the pillow. "Yeah, maybe." But unbeknownst to him, Lily had been swapping out his prescription pills with placebos she ordered online. She'd done it gradually, so the shift was subtle enough that even David didn't immediately connect the dots. His symptoms mimicked stress, and he didn't have the clarity to recognize the source. As his health declined, so did his mental state. Isolation sets in. As his condition worsened, David grew more irritable, snapping at those around him, colleagues, family, friends. One evening, his sister Laura called, concerned about the distance that had grown between them. "David, we barely see you anymore," she said softly over the phone. "You've missed the last 2 family dinners, and Mom's been asking about you. What's going on?" David, hunched over his desk, pinched the bridge of his nose. "I'm just overwhelmed, Laura. Work is a mess. Everything is a mess." "Then let us help you," Laura insisted. "You don't have to go through this alone." "I don't need help," David snapped, more harshly than intended. I need things to go right for once." There was a long pause on the other end. When Laura finally spoke again, her voice was tight. "You know we're always here for you, but I can't force you to let us in." When the call ended, David felt a pang of regret, but it was quickly overtaken by exhaustion and frustration. His family felt like another burden, another part of his life slipping away. At home, Lily was always there, offering her quiet, unwavering support. She played the role of the perfect wife to perfection, never once raising her voice or showing frustration. When David returned from work, drained and defeated, she would greet him with a warm smile, offer a glass of wine, and ask about his day. "It's been tough," he'd mutter, collapsing onto the couch. "I don't know what's happening, Lily. Everything's falling apart." "It's just a phase," she'd whisper, stroking his hair. "We'll get through this. You'll get through this." And he believed her. Despite all the chaos, Lily was his rock, the one constant in the storm. He never suspected she was the one feeding that storm. The collapse of friendships. David's social life also began to crumble. His behavior, erratic, paranoid, and often angry, pushed away the few friends he had left. Nights out with Jeff and other colleagues became less frequent, until one by one, they stopped inviting him altogether. One night, David noticed that his work group chat had gone silent. The usual stream of jokes and plans for after-work drinks had dried up. Feeling isolated, he messaged Jeff. "Hey, are you guys going out tonight?" The reply came minutes later. "Sorry, man. Just a small thing. Maybe next time?" David stared at the screen, the excuse hanging there like a slap to the face. Maybe next time. He was being phased out, and he knew it. He turned to Lily, who sat beside him on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Jeff and the guys are going out," he muttered. "But they didn't invite me." Lily looked up, feigning sympathy. "Maybe they just didn't think you'd want to go. You've been so stressed lately." David sighed, running a hand over his face. "Maybe." Lily watched him from the corner of her eye, her lips curling into the faintest of smiles as she scrolled through her phone. Another friend lost. Another step closer to David's isolation. Her plan was unfolding exactly as she had envisioned. The breaking point. It all came to a head one morning when David arrived at work, only to find out that he had been passed over for a promotion he'd been working toward for years. Worse, the promotion had gone to someone less qualified, someone who hadn't even been in the company as long as he had. The news hit him like a freight train. David stormed out of the office, his fists clenched, his chest heaving with anger. He called Lily as he paced the sidewalk outside the building, trying to make sense of it all. "They gave the promotion to Ethan," he fumed, his voice shaking. "Can you believe that? I've been killing myself for this company, and they give it to someone who doesn't even deserve it." Lily's voice on the other end was calm, soothing. "That's awful, David. I'm so sorry. But maybe it's a blessing in disguise. You've been so stressed lately. Maybe this is a sign you need to take a step back and focus on yourself." David groaned. "I don't need a sign. I need things to stop falling apart." Lily remained silent for a moment, her tone gentle when she spoke again. "Maybe it's not about everything falling apart, David. Maybe it's about how you're holding on." The words hung in the air, deceptively simple, laced with hidden meaning. David, too lost in his own turmoil, didn't recognize the weight behind them. As the days went on, his life continued to spiral further out of control. Every small defeat felt like a personal failure. And through it all, Lily stood by his side, calm and composed, always there to listen and offer her carefully crafted words of comfort. David's world was crumbling, and he clung to the one person he believed was still on his side, unaware that Lily was the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. The slow descent had begun in earnest, and the worst was yet to come. Act 3. The twist unfolds. David's career hit rock bottom on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. He had been anxiously awaiting the finalization of a massive deal that would have brought in a key client, one whose name would bolster his reputation and put him back on track. But when the client pulled out at the last moment due to a miscommunication, it felt like the final nail in the coffin. He sat in his office, staring blankly at his phone, still in shock. How had everything fallen apart so completely? His mind raced, trying to pinpoint the moment it all started unraveling. For weeks now, he had been grasping at the pieces of his life, watching as they slipped through his fingers. But this felt like the final blow. The email from his boss confirmed his worst fear. "David, we need to talk. Please come in tomorrow morning to discuss your future with the company." He knew what that meant. Tomorrow, his career would officially be over. As he trudged through the door of their home that evening, soaked from the downpour, the weight of his failures pressed down on him. David collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling, his chest tight. He had lost almost everything. His friends, his standing at work, even his family had become distant. And now this. He was utterly defeated. Lily appeared in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the dim light of the hallway. She watched him for a moment, her eyes cold despite the concern she feigned. David didn't notice. He was lost in his own despair. "I don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "Why is everything falling apart?" Lily walked slowly to the couch, sitting down beside him. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle, almost tender. "David," she said quietly, "do you remember the night I forgave you?" He turned to look at her, confused. "Of course I do," he said. "You forgave me after everything. You forgave me, and we moved on." Lily's lips curled into a small, bitter smile. "No, David. You moved on. I didn't." For a split second, David thought he must have misheard her. His heart skipped a beat, his pulse quickening. What do you mean?" Her smile widened, but it was a cruel, hollow thing. She leaned in, closer, her voice lowering to a venomous whisper. "I never forgave you. From the moment you admitted your affair, I've been planning this." The words hung in the air like a guillotine waiting to fall. David felt the room tilt beneath him. His body tensed as if his world had been thrown off balance. He stared at her, his mouth dry, his heart pounding in his chest. "Lily, what are you saying?" She shifted back, her calm, collected demeanor returning as she regarded him with cold detachment. "Every lost opportunity, every inconvenience, every failure. It was me. I orchestrated it all. Slowly, carefully, making sure you'd lose everything that mattered to you, one piece at a time." David blinked, trying to process the weight of what she was telling him. His mind raced, replaying the last few months in a new light. The missed meetings, the strange health issues, the way his colleagues had started pulling away from him. His thoughts spun as he struggled to make sense of it all. "No," he breathed, shaking his head. "No, you couldn't have." Lily stood up, her face betraying no emotion. "Couldn't I?" she said, arching an eyebrow. "Who do you think sent that wrong memo to your client? Who set your alarm an hour late for your presentation? Who swapped out your medication with placebos?" She crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. "Who do you think told Jeff about your outburst at the office? Who started the rumors that you were falling apart?" David's knees felt weak as he stumbled to his feet, retreating from her, trying to distance himself from this monster wearing his wife's face. "Why?" His voice cracked, desperation leaking through. "Why would you do this?" Lily took a step closer, her gaze sharp and predatory now. "Because you thought you could betray me and get away with it. You thought an apology would erase everything, that I could just forget and pretend it never happened." David shook his head, his voice trembling. I thought we were fixing things. You said we were moving on. That's what you wanted to believe," Lily said softly, a dangerous glint in her eye. "I let you think that. I needed you to believe that, so you wouldn't see it coming. I wanted to watch you crumble, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of the man who thought he could break me." She stepped closer until they were face to face, her expression dark, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. "You've lost everything now, David. Your career, your friends, your family. And the best part is, you never even suspected it. You never saw it coming." David felt the walls closing in on him, his chest constricting as if the air had been sucked from the room. His mind raced, trying to find a way to fix this, to undo what had been done. But he realized with growing horror that there was nothing left to fix. He had lost everything. "Lily, please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You don't have to do this." She tilted her head slightly, her expression almost pitying now. "Oh, David," she murmured, "I already have." There was a cold finality in her words that sent a shiver down his spine. He stared at her, broken, defeated, unable to comprehend the depth of her cruelty. Lily had orchestrated his ruin, and he had walked right into it without even knowing. His legs buckled beneath him, and he collapsed back onto the couch, his head in his hands. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice hoarse with despair. Lily stood above him, her expression unreadable. "I don't want anything from you anymore, David," she said quietly. "You're not worth it." With that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving him alone in the wreckage of his life, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Epilogue. The final blow. David sat in the silence of their now empty home, staring blankly at the scattered remnants of his former life. The house that had once been filled with warmth and comfort was now cold and lifeless, echoing with the hollowness of his downfall. His career was over. The company had let him go after the final client walked away, and his boss's words still echoed in his mind. "I don't know what's happened to you, David, but we can't keep you here anymore." His colleagues no longer called or checked in. His friends had slowly distanced themselves, citing his erratic behavior and outbursts. Even his family had stopped reaching out, concerned by the man he had become but too weary of his endless stream of complaints and paranoia. The house was quieter now than ever. The ticking of the clock in the hallway was the only sound, each second a painful reminder of his isolation. He stood in the living room, eyes wandering over the empty walls where family photos had once hung. The shelves where his awards and certificates used to sit were now bare. Everything he had built, everything he had worked for, was gone. On the coffee table lay the papers, the divorce documents that Lily had filed in secret weeks ago. He hadn't even noticed. In his desperation, in his blind reliance on her, he had overlooked the most obvious sign of her plan. He was losing his wife, too. No, he had already lost her long ago. He just hadn't realized it until now. David picked up the papers, his hands trembling as he flipped through them. Everything was already in motion. The assets were gone, the accounts drained, the house listed for sale, all meticulously planned by Lily while he had been too busy drowning in his own misery to notice. It was like he had been sleepwalking through his own destruction, oblivious to the fact that she had been orchestrating it from the start. A single sheet of paper, folded neatly on top of the divorce documents, caught his eye. It was a handwritten note, penned in Lily's familiar, neat script. He hesitated before opening it, fearing what it might say. Finally, with a shaking breath, he unfolded it. "David," the note began, "I told you once that we would get through this together. You believed me because you wanted to believe me. But you never took the time to understand the depth of what you did. You shattered something in me that I could never repair. And so, I decided to do the same to you. Slowly, patiently, methodically. Now we're even. You've lost everything, just like I did when you betrayed me. But the difference is that I'm not broken anymore. I'm free. You, on the other hand, will always be trapped in the wreckage you created. Goodbye." David let the letter fall to the floor. He could hardly breathe. A wave of nausea washed over him as the full weight of her words sunk in. He stumbled back, collapsing onto the couch, his head in his hands. She had done it. She had utterly destroyed him, and he never saw it coming. As the evening wore on, the oppressive silence of the house grew heavier. Shadows stretched across the room, creeping in from the corners as the last light of day slipped away. David could still hear her voice in his head, calm and steady, echoing her final confession. Every missed opportunity, every failure, every moment he had doubted himself, it had all been part of her plan. She had woven herself so perfectly into his life, into his downfall, that he hadn't been able to see her hand behind it all. He had trusted her. Even after the affair, he had believed that somehow they could rebuild. He had let his guard down, convinced that her forgiveness was real. Now, he was alone, left with nothing but the ruins of his life and the knowledge that he had been played so completely. The weight of it crushed him, suffocating him under the enormity of his failures. Across town, Lily stood in front of a modest apartment building, looking up at the clear evening sky. The cool breeze brushed against her skin, carrying with it the scent of freedom. She smiled, a real, unburdened smile, as she unlocked the door to her new home. Inside, everything was new, fresh. No reminders of the past, no ghosts of betrayal. Just a clean slate, a new beginning. She had waited for this moment for so long, planned for it, dreamed of it. Every step of the way, she had remained patient, carefully, guiding David toward his own destruction while keeping her own heart guarded. She had learned how to control her anger, to channel it into something far more powerful, control. And now, she was free. Free from the man who had betrayed her, free from the life she no longer wanted, free to live on her own terms. There was no sense of triumph, no gloating satisfaction in her victory, just peace. She had done what she needed to do, and now it was over. As she settled into her new space, Lily's phone buzzed on the counter. A text message from a friend asking about dinner plans. She picked it up, smiling as she typed her response, the weight of the past finally lifting from her shoulders. She paused for a moment, reflecting on everything she had endured and the lengths she had gone to reclaim her power. But that part of her life was over now. She had no need for revenge anymore. There was only the future now, bright, open, and full of possibilities. With a deep breath, Lily walked to the window and gazed out into the night, a sense of calm settling over her. She had taken back control, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe again. Far away, back in the hollow shell of the house they once shared, David sat in darkness, a broken man with nothing left. Lily didn't need to see him to know it. She could feel the finality of it all, the end of their story, the last chapter closed. With one last smile, she turned away from the window and closed the door behind her, stepping fully into her new life.